no matter what you do with the rest of your life, foraging gives you this focus that allows you to kind of come back to yourself, your world, your environment, and your health, and really brings that sacred cycle of life back into your life. It just seems to engender a general feeling of happiness and an overall health to anybody that does it. And I've had a lot of people over the years tell me that my books have changed their life. And that's humbling, but it's also awesome because that's why I did it, because it's changed my life. I didn't have a very good childhood. It gave me an outlet for my energy, and it gave me food. It gave me health. And I learned that nature would never let me down as long as I played by her rules. And that offer stands for everybody.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Foraging is one of the most practical life skills we can learn. Whether you live in the city, the suburbs, or out in the countryside, nature consistently provides an abundance of wild, edible foods that are ours for the taking. They offer a wonderful variety of flavors along with nutritional profiles that make foraging a legitimate source of true local food. This is episode 285, and our guest today is Samuel Thayer. Sam is the author of Forager's Harvest and Nature's Garden. He is a foraging educator and wild food gatherer who began survival camping at age 14. Basically, it was Sam's difficult childhood that practically forced him to learn at a very young age how to care for his nutritional needs through foraging. That life skill broadened into a lifelong quest to learn to identify and harvest edible plants and educate others about them. Today, Sam shares some of that knowledge with us. He reminds us of the wild food that's growing right around us, wherever we are. He describes the bounty of his own pantry, replete with walnuts, hazelnuts, wild rice, ramps, plums, and more. And in a lot of ways, Sam simply takes us back to our roots. He reminds us of the beauty and nutrient value of a diverse local diet like that of our ancestors. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to consider an end-of-year gift to the Weston A. Price Foundation. We are a member-supported nonprofit. How about a gift to the foundation of about $1 per podcast that we put out this year? That'd be about $50. Just go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the Donate Now button. Thanks in advance. And Ancestral Supplements with grass-fed blood vitality. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced, nose-to-tail, organ meats, bone marrow, and blood in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Blood Vitality provides us with all of the nutritional building blocks we need to support our own life force, blood. Our ancestors knew that blood made us healthy, smart, and strong. And thankfully, this wisdom hasn't been entirely lost. Throughout many cultures, blood is still honored every day as a sacred food. Blood was and still is a highly prized delicacy. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sam.
Thank you for having me, Hilda.
Well, we're here on your property, and I just ate the most amazing wild plum. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever had wild plum before. How did these trees, appear on your property here? Did you cultivate them, or were they wild, like really wild?
When we bought the property, there was a whole bunch of wild plums scattered all over the property. I've also transplanted root cuttings from my favorite ones so that I have quite a few more than I started with.
And what do you do with them?
We eat them fresh when they're perfectly ripe. We just pop them in our mouths and suck the juice out, which is my favorite way, but we also make fruit leather. We make jam, we make wine, we make vinegar. We can the whole plums in a thinned out maple syrup like canned peaches and eat those through the winter. We dry the plums and then rehydrate them. All kinds of things to do with wild plums.
I came out here because I'd gotten wind of your foraging forays, and it seems like you are so knowledgeable about so many plants and things. How did this all get started for you, Sam? I don't remember.
It started when I was a little kid and I was hungry. And I love to be outside. So I combined those two things. And I have had the blessing that I've been interested in it my whole life. So I've been able to build in my adult life on my obsessions that I had as a child. And I've learned anywhere I can. I learned some from my grandmother, a lot from books, from anyone who had information about what you could eat. I listened and I remembered and I tried it.
And you were kind of scrappy, right? I remember you were saying something about like kind of stealing fruit from other people's orchards. Is that true?
It's very true. I had a really poor diet growing up, and I craved anything other than the cold cereal that my mom tried to raise me on. And so, not that I didn't like cold cereal, but I needed something else with it. So I went out and I trapped and hunted and captured animals and caught fish to eat and built fires in the woods to cook them. And I gathered wild vegetables and I stole vegetables from gardens in my neighborhood, and I stole apples and plums from the trees anywhere I could.
Now, were you an only child? I'm just curious about that.
I am the number 4 out of 5.
And is anybody else as into all this stuff as you are, the foraging and the kind of survival skills that you've developed?
No, it's pretty much just me.
Well, at least you've written books to guide them. Tell me more about the diversity of plants and greens that you can just harvest right here in your own backyard.
Well, I don't know how many are in the backyard exactly, but within walking distance of my house, there's about 170 green vegetables, leafy vegetables or shoot vegetables that I collect around here.
And what do you do with them?
Well, I like greens, just what I call a walking salad. I take a few different kinds and shove it in my mouth and eat it while I'm out hiking. But I also like greens fried in either the hickory nut oil that we make or with bacon or in lard. And you take a variety of greens, 6 or 7 species, maybe 15 species, and put them all together. Or greens chopped fine and then mixed with egg and cooked into like an egg and green patty. That's a great way to have greens.
And how many varieties did you say around here?
About 170 different species.
And this kind of jives with something Chris Masterjohn told me a while ago. He said our ancestors ate a much more diverse diet than we do.
I couldn't find 170 species of green leafy vegetable if I went to all the grocery stores in the Midwest. We eat an incredibly depauperate variety of vegetables, and really across the board, all of our foods. We eat whatever we want and what we like the best, and we tend to just focus on 1 or 2 foods in our modern civilized diets, whereas our ancestors ate a huge variety of each produce type. So we have 1 carrot-like vegetable. Eastern North America has about 30 carrot-like vegetables that grow wild. So foraging gives you the opportunity to broaden your diet enormously.
And what are we missing when we don't?
Well, we're missing great flavor experiences, but we're also missing this nutritional diversity. So almost all vegetables are nutritious, but you get the most well-rounded diet by having a great variety throughout the seasons.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like that you said that you sometimes do it in a bacon fat or cook in lard, because I understand that sometimes the animal fats can make the nutrition in greens more bioavailable.
Yeah, you find that even in many parts of the world, leafy greens are traditionally cooked in pork fat. In fact, one of the key components of the actual original Mediterranean diet as it was discovered before it was sort of co-opted and changed by the American media was a variety of wild greens collected by villagers in the Mediterranean region and cooked with lard or any animal fat makes the vitamin A and many of the other vitamins more bioavailable.
And let's get specific about some of the greens you actually just showed me on your property. What are some of your favorites?
One thing we collected that's in season right now in early fall is called sochan. That's the Cherokee name for it. And this is a sunflower relative, or the young greens come out actually 3 times a year, once in the spring, once in the summer, and once in the fall. And they're excellent fried with fat, particularly when they're mixed with like a milder green and onion of some type.
It sounds amazing. And did you just start experimenting like, hey, okay, I looked up sochan, now I'm going to start cooking it this way just to see what you liked? Or did you look into recipe books and stuff?
I did both. I mean, all the traditional Cherokee recipes that I have seen for sochan, they're pretty uniform in that it was traditionally eaten cooked with lard, fried in lard. I look for the cultural guidance and then I experiment following in the directions I was pointed.
Now, Earlier, we were talking a little bit about eating locally and seasonally, and it seems like an easy thing here, but not so much for those of us who are surrounded by buildings instead of trees.
You know, in urban areas, you still have a great diversity of plants that can be gathered. I actually grew up mostly in the city, and I've collected wild food in New York, Chicago, DC, and in small towns. And the great thing about urban foraging is it doesn't vary a lot according to the size of your metropolitan area. It's the same plants in urban areas. And there's a lot of stuff if you can find a safe place to forage where it's clean. There's not herbicides being sprayed, and there's not a whole bunch of exhaust from vehicles right there. There's a lot of good food to be harvested in the city.
What might I find? I live in DC.
Well, many of the things we looked at today, the lamb's quarters, the amaranth. Another thing really common in the cities is a nettle relative called pellitory, which grows along walls and house foundations. There are all sorts of brushy areas in most cities that have things like wild grapes, wild plums, elderberries. Really, the diversity is pretty incredible.
And sometimes it's right underfoot and we don't notice it. I'm bringing this up because I remember going to some farmer's market and they were like, this is purslane. I'm like, okay, this is really good. They put a little olive oil or something on it. Then I go home and I see it growing between the bricks in my patio.
You know, that's quite common. I guarantee you could take me to where you live and within half a block, I could find you 30 different wild edibles.
I think it's really important for us also now to start to identify the plants and experiment with cooking them because we don't know what the future holds.
I like the security of knowing that I can feed myself, but I always tell people, don't do this out of fear. Do it out of excitement, because you start collecting these wild fruits, nuts, seeds, and vegetables, and you're going to find that you crave them and you want them, and you can't really imagine life without them once you get used to them.
Are they more appealing to you than the packaged foods on the supermarket shelf?
They're more appealing because not only are they funner to acquire, but they're more nutritious and they're free. And I get to have flavor experiences that I just can't buy in the store.
So you mentioned sochan. What other greens are some of your favorites here that you've harvested?
You mean right now at this time of year?
Like the one we just tried. That was one that was like a celery kind of thing.
Yeah, so that was clearweed. And clearweed is a relative of nettles. And the stem is very stiff. And it's made stiff by water pressure. And because it doesn't use fiber to hold its stem up, it stays tender and kind of crunchy all through the growing season. So that's a not very well known edible, but it's delicious. It can be eaten raw, and it's all over the eastern part of this country. Almost everybody has it growing near their house.
And what was the like a golden one that you pointed out? It was like some kind of weed too, or fern, maybe. You said, "Oh my gosh, this is like all yellow. It looks like sunflowers."
Well, that was the sochan. That was yeah. It has a sunflower-like flower. So we eat the greens, but it's also worth growing just for its beauty. In fact, most native plant nurseries carry it just as a decorative plant.
And there was something else that you said that you call it edimental because it's edible and ornamental. What plant was that? Do you recall?
Yeah, that was the same one, the sochan.
Obviously, I'm in love with the sochan.
Yeah, sort of I think that term was coined by Stephen Barstow. He's a Norwegian forager / gardener, but he talks about these edimentals, plants that are edible and beautiful. So sochan is a great example. So is the angelica that I showed you. And so is pokeweed. You know, people think of that as like an obnoxious weed, but it is gorgeous.
Neat. So do your kids also enjoy the greens and the nuts and the things that you harvest?
Well, to my kids, this is just normal. This is just food. So like any children, they have their preferences, but it hasn't occurred to them that not eating this stuff is an option.
And we've been hanging out a little bit this morning, and I feel like they have a vibrant energy and kind of a natural beauty that comes from the nourishment that you've been giving them.
I hope so. I hope I'm giving them a better diet than the one I grew up on.
Yeah. That's a good thing to hear. So let's say I was like, okay, I live in the city. I know there's food around me. What would be like a handy guide or a way to start getting familiar with the plants that are right around me?
The most important thing with beginning to forage is to understand that you'll learn one plant at a time. There's a lot of places you can learn that plant. It might be from another person. it might be from a book, but you do it slowly and carefully and thoroughly so that you're totally comfortable that you have the correct plant. And you start with that one. And once you learn it well enough that you're eating it, you're not going to forget it. You'll have it for the rest of your life, and then you move on to the next one.
Yeah, because sometimes I think we get afraid, like, oh my gosh, I've heard that some mushrooms are poisonous, and that makes us want to stay away from all of it.
Yeah, some mushrooms are poisonous. Don't worry about it. You just don't eat those. We have this fear of poisoning ourselves and dying from it. But this is something that happens so infrequently, it's incredible. And I have a file folder where I have case studies of plant and mushroom poisonings. And what you find is that the vast majority are when people ate a random plant without making any attempt to identify it. So it wasn't a misidentification, it was a non-identification. And as long as you have a reasonably good head on your shoulders, you know that you're not supposed to eat things without knowing what they are. If you follow that rule, you'll be okay.
Of course, I always think of the guy who they made the movie about, and I think it was called Into the Wild, and he apparently died from eating some berry that he hadn't properly identified.
Yeah, well, the plant in question there was Hedysarum alpinum, which is a wild legume. And this is, again, we have this archetype of this fable that we really like to hear. But the truth is that that's not what happened. Chris starved to death. In fact, the plant that he was eating, I've eaten both the seeds and the roots, and they're both delicious. There is no reason to suspect that this plant killed him. This is really just a fabricated story to sell a book and a movie. It's not what actually happened to Chris.
But why would he have starved to death if there's food all around us in nature?
Well, Chris didn't know what the food was. He didn't put in the time that he would have needed to be successful at that endeavor, trying to feed himself in the wild. There's a lot to learn here. You don't pick up like a Japanese translation book and look at it for a couple of days and then go to Japan and expect to speak fluently. And Chris went to Alaska with a little bit of forethought and a little bit of research and thought he was going to be fluent in living off the land, and he wasn't yet, and he got into a real bad situation.
Coming up, Sam explains how foraging takes eating local to a whole new level.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Toups & Co. Organics. They do things differently. Skincare products should nourish the skin without hormone-disrupting toxins and fragrances. Toups & Co. Organics was started by a husband and wife team that realized that what is put on the body is just as important as what is put in it. All of Toups & Co. Organic skincare products are made with wholesome, clean, and recognizable ingredients. Organic fair trade ingredients, highest quality cold-pressed olive oil, tallow from grass-fed cows, certified organic grade essential oils, and love. Basically, they use only what they would want for their own family. And their products really work. Their kids' hair and skin glows and shines. And yours can too. Check out their products, skincare, makeup, deodorant, soaps, baby wash balms, and more at toupsandco.com. That's TOUPS and co.com. And use the coupon code WISETRADITIONS, all lowercase one word, for 10% off your first order. Toups & Co. Organics. They do things differently. And this episode is brought to you in part by Grass-Fed Blood Vitality by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and blood in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Weston A. Price traveled the world to study ancestral human nutrition, and he has written about many accounts of tribes whose diets consisted of milk, meat, and blood. These tribes included the Bahima tribe, Nilotic tribes, the Maasai, the Muhima, and Nur tribe. Price wrote, the Nurs at Malakal on the Nile River are a unique tribe because of their remarkable stature. Many of the women are 6 feet tall, and the men range from 6 to 7.5 feet in height. Their food consists very largely of animal life of the Nile, dairy products, milk, and blood from the herds. Throughout the centuries, these tribes have depended very largely on milk, meat, and blood. They milk the cows daily and bleed the steers at regular intervals by a unique process. These 3 sources, milk, blood, and meat, provide them with liberal supplies of bodybuilding minerals and the special vitamins, both fat-soluble and water-soluble. Blood Vitality provides us with all of the nutritional building blocks we need to support our own life force, blood. Our ancestors knew that blood made us healthy, smart, and strong, and thankfully this wisdom hasn't been entirely lost. Throughout many cultures, blood is still honored every day as a sacred food and used in many dishes. Sausage, pancakes, soup, pastries, even candy bars are all made with blood. Blood was and still is a highly prized delicacy. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
There's kind of a myth that hunting and gathering is something that doesn't take much intelligence, but the intelligence of the human mind came from the crucible of hunting and gathering. And there is a lot to learn here, and I'm not trying to scare people away, but I also don't want to minimize it, and I don't want people to think that it's just a piece of cake and you can learn it in a weekend, because you can't. It takes many years to become proficient. I spent my whole life learning this, and I've been slow because I didn't have a tradition to teach it to me. I didn't have elders to teach it to me, but I'm still learning new plants every year.
And is this why you decided to write books? Because it's one way in which you can impart your wisdom and knowledge with others?
Yeah, it really was. I kind of spontaneously started leading plant walks when I was in my late teens, and it eventually developed into something more formalized, and I realized that I had knowledge that other people really wanted. I had a great time acquiring the knowledge, and some of it was tricky to get to. So I couldn't help but share it with people. That's why I wrote my books.
And do you feel like there's more interest now than before, Sam?
You know, I'm not sure if there is. It's at any point I've heard that the interest in foraging is increasing. And if you read books from the 60s, they say it's increasing. And from the 70s, they say it's increasing. And people today are saying it's increasing. And it seems to fluctuate, to kind of go up and down. I hope it's increasing, but I'm not certain.
You know, I think to a large degree, we are so wed to convenience nowadays. So we think we're eating locally and seasonally when we go to the grocery store and something, I don't know, our berries are not from Chile, you know, or there's a sign over it that says local. Foraging is a whole different level.
Yeah, this is as local as it gets. I mean, I love it when I can go to somebody's house and show them 5 or 6 wild edibles right in their front yard. I was traveling a few years ago and I stopped at a laundromat, and just for giggles, I went out and there was a little strip of dirt between the building and the sidewalk, and I counted 28 edible plants in that strip by the laundromat while my clothes were drying.
That's amazing. Now, is your wife and are your friends as into this as you are?
My wife and I love foraging together. I have a lot of friends that are into foraging, but I don't choose my friends just according to how much they gather wild food.
That's good. Well, yeah, that would be, I think you wouldn't have maybe as many friends if you did it that way. Well, you just showed me your pantry laden with foods that you've canned, greens, fruits, and so forth. Can that carry you all through a winter?
We can go through the year without purchasing food, but we do purchase food. I mean, we're not extremists or we're not trying to push ourselves, but it is really comforting to know that we have plenty of food to get through the seasons.
And tell all of us some of the things you have in your pantry.
Well, we have a lot of wild rice. I have hazelnuts, butternuts, black walnuts, lotus nuts, hickory nuts. I've got hickory oil. I've got different vinegars that I've made. I have amaranth seed, lamb quarters seed. I have dried nettle greens. I have powdered ramp leaves. I've got canned wild plums, frozen blueberries, blueberry juice, blueberry fruit leather, serviceberry fruit leather. I have several different species of mushrooms dried. We've got maple syrup and maple sugar. The list is long. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of things.
I see. And then I'm sure you've got meats and things like that in your freezer, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're raising a couple pigs right now, and we have ducks for eggs, and we raise a few chickens to butcher, and we hunt squirrels and deer and ducks and rabbits, snowshoe hares. So we have a lot of wild meat in our diet and home-raised meat in our diet.
I think you're a wilditarian.
Yeah, I say I'm a wild eater.
And so I feel like you must get a tremendous amount of satisfaction in knowing, like you said, that you're self-sufficient and that you're providing for your family, but also in showing other people they can do the same.
It really is exciting. I mean, this is a sacred process of feeding yourself. I mean, when you put your hands into the earth and onto the food, and you put that food into your body, you feel the sacredness of that cycle of feeding yourself. And it's kind of magical. And to be able to bring somebody along and give them that experience makes me really happy. And I've seen it over the years. I've seen it bring about changes in the lives of people. And I know what it does in my heart. So it makes me feel great to see it happening in other people too.
And talk to me about the changes, like maybe you even just saw in one person as a result of what they learned about foraging and how they got going into it.
Well, no matter what you do with the rest of your life, foraging gives you this focus that allows you to kind of come back to yourself, your world, your environment, and your health, and really brings that sacred cycle of life back into your life. It just seems to engender a general feeling of happiness and an overall health to anybody that does it. And I've had a lot of people over the years tell me that my books have changed their life. And that's humbling, but it's also awesome because that's why I did it, because it's changed my life. I didn't have a very good childhood. It gave me an outlet for my energy, and it gave me food. It gave me health. And I learned that nature would never let me down as long as I played by her rules. And that offer stands for everybody.
Oh, I love that. It sounds like it nourished you in more ways than one.
Yeah, I mean, it really is nourishing to the soul. And I feel like this is what we need as a society. We need more of the sacred in our lives. We need to be reminded that we don't make food. Nature makes food. And we need to be reminded that once we have our basic needs met, this is the stuff that matters. Health and love and wellness and living in a vibrant world, that's what matters.
Just now, yeah, walking through the orchard with your daughter and eating an apple just picked off the tree, I get a sense and literally a taste of what that life and that kind of living looks like.
I'm glad I could share it with you.
Me too. So now I want to ask you a question I often pose at the end. If the listener could do just one thing to improve their health, and you might just want to say one thing they would do to get started with foraging, I don't know, but if they could just do one thing to move in the direction of the life you're describing, what would you recommend that they do, Sam?
I do have kind of a canned response to that. The easiest way you can make your life better with foraging is eat fried greens.
Ah, fried in the lard, you were saying, or the bacon grease.
It doesn't have to be lard, but that's a good option.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Our guest today was Samuel Thayer. Visit his website, foragersharvest.com, for his blog, shop, and resources. And I'm Hilda Labrada Gore. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a review from Apple Podcasts. Dr. Stan Holmes says this is one of the most important podcasts of our time. Weston Price was a pioneer ahead of his time. Today's trends often mirror principles he promoted in his day. Tune in and commit to a greater level of health. Thank you so much, Dr. Stanholm. We appreciate your review. And feel free to do the same. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We are nearly at 1,000 reviews, and your review could put us over the top. Thanks so much for listening. Stay well, my friend. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.